Hey guys, Jeff at Hubie's Garage, and yeah, it's story time today. Get to tell you a story about something that happened to me when I was a young kid, and it was something that, if I only knew what I knew now back then. It was the story of my '70s Chevelle, and I use the word "my" loosely because the car never really fully got into my possession. So let me tell you the story of what happened. So basically, I was about 17 years old, and I had a landscape business, used to mow lawns, and I had a neighbor whom I worked for who had a lot of properties that he managed. So I get a call from him one day, and or he probably came over to the house and said, "Hey, I got another one for you. I need you to go over this address and do a yard cleanup and get the place presentable, because I just had to throw my tenants out, and they stopped paying rent, and he wanted the place cleaned up and get it ready for new tenants." So I loaded everything up and went over to this house, and lo and behold, there was almost the coup de grace of all muscle cars ever made. It was not an LS6 454 70 Chevelle, but it was close. It was a SS396 70 Chevelle, and so it was the dark green, and it had the white racing stripes on it. So I did all the work that I needed to do. I continued working and looking in the car, and was pretty impressed with the car. The car was all complete. It factory untouched. I mean, it was a barn find without the barn is what it was. And so I did my work, got everything cleaned up at the house, and then went back and talked to my neighbor, and I said, "Hey, what's the story with that Chevelle?" Because he was a car guy. He had a '68 Mustang. It was a GT CS, which was the California Special. It had the Shelby rear end on it. And I said, "What's the story with that Chevelle?" And he goes, "Well, I don't know." He says, the tenant was basically evicted, and everything was taken out of the house, and everything was moved except for the car. And he stated that he'd left 2 or 3 additional messages after he had moved out to come get the car and never got a reply. So I was working as a volunteer firefighter at the time, and we happened to have a guy on our department that owned a towing business. He owned a gas station and a towing business. And so I started telling the guys the story about this Chevelle, and he comes up to me and he says, "Well, what does the owner want to do with it?" And I go, "Well, they can't get a hold of the owner. It's the property manager. It's on the driveway on the property of the house, and he wants it gone." And he goes, "Well, you need to do a private impound on the car and do a lien sale on it." And I said, "Wow, that sounds, real legal. I mean, how could you do that?" And he said, "I do them all the time." He said, "Why don't you just go ahead and take possession of the car, and I'll do the lien sale for you." Well, he was, for lack of a better term, he was always kind of a shady character. He was one of those guys that you trust him with you on the fire engine because he had many years, but business-wise, you tried not to get involved with him too much. He assured me that he could take care of all the paperwork and do all that stuff for me, because he does that all the times on other cars that he impounds through the towing business. And so at that point, I thought, well, okay, I'll move forward with it. I'd go talk to my neighbor, and he said, "Yeah, if you want to do that, that's totally fine by me. I just want it off my property. That's all I care about. Get rid of it. I don't care who it goes to, just off my property." So I came back here. We're here at Howie's Garage. This is the original Hubie's Garage. This is where it started. This is where I grew up, and this is where my '55 Bel Air 2-door sedan was built. And at the time, I had the '55 Bel Air 2-door sedan, as well as my dad's '55 hardtop that at the time was a shell, and my '55, which was torn down to about the same process. It was a shell and a frame. It had the front clip off it, no motor, no trans. And I came to my dad and I said, "Dad, I want to bring home another car." And he about laughed me right out the front door. He didn't even want to hear what it was. He just said, "I'm not going to do that to your mother, and I'm not going to do that to the house and the neighbors, and just bring home another car that doesn't run. You've already got one project. Focus on that."
Memorandum. I would like to take a meeting with you at some point tonight to discuss the future of that vehicle, which you purchased several months ago, yet has darkened our driveway immobile ever since.
Okay, Dad. Noted.
So what I did was I decided to get a storage facility, and I was going to store it at a storage facility. And I told that to my buddies, because I was 17, I was still in high school. And I told that to my buddies, and my one friend Mike was like, hey, don't do that. Don't waste your money. Bring it over to my house. I got room. Bring it over onto my cul-de-sac. You know, Mike had a 66 Pro Street Nova, you know, and they had been doing a lot of work on cars there. And he just said, yeah, what does it matter? Bring over the Chevelle. So that was dumb mistake number one. I brought it over to his house and cleaned the car up, got it working, got the, went through and figured out everything that was wrong with it. And the only thing that it needed was it needed keys to get into the car and to unlock the ignition. It had primer spots on it, and the bumpers, front and rear bumpers, were rusty. You know, they needed to be re-chromed, which plating at the time was cheap back in those days. And it had a Holley 4-barrel, like a 750 double pumper or something close, maybe a 3310, I don't remember, but it needed to be rebuilt because it had been sitting for a while. So started to go through all that process, and then bad mistake number two comes along. My buddy's house had street sweeping, and they had street sweeping where opposite sides of the streets. Well, we were fine with that. We were moving the car. We moved the car one side to the next, you know, each particular street sweeping day. And we had the car on the correct side of the street. However, and I ended up working with this guy later because I ran calls with him later through the police and fire friendships that we had. But we had an overzealous motor officer who came through and was ticketing all the streets that were on the wrong side of the street. And he just happens to look over on the correct side of the street where everybody should have been parked that day. He saw the Chevelle, saw the expired tags, and decided to run the plates on the car, figured out that the car hadn't been registered in some time, it was completely out of place, and he called their contract towing company, which was in the next city from my fire buddy's towing company, who didn't have the contract, and a competitor tow truck company got the car and towed the car away. Well, the stupidity of youth. Number one, I hadn't started the private impound process. I had not legally with paperwork. I didn't have any paperwork for any of that. I didn't have the private impound paperwork, and I certainly had not started the lien sale process. So when it went to the other towing company, I had no legal grounds, no paperwork, no nothing to even prove that I had held possession of the, I won't say ownership, but I'll say possession of the car at that time. So what ended up happening was I got desperate, and I managed to get a hold of the original owner of the car. And I felt bad for this guy. You know, I just figured it was somebody that just abandoned the car or whatever, but I got to hear his story, and he wasn't real thrilled with the phone call, as you can imagine. So I talked to him, and he was very careful about what words he answered or questions he answered. But apparently what happened was it sounded like he had filed for bankruptcy, and there was a bank that came in and took over the bankruptcy proceedings for his estate. And part of that was he forfeited the Chevelle. So I felt bad for him because he didn't get into any history of the car or how much, you know, it was his baby or anything like that. But I can only imagine what it would be like to have, you know, a bank taking away your pride and joy, if that was indeed his pride and joy. I mean, the car hadn't run, it had been in his driveway for some time, but at that point I said, well, I'm a young kid, I'm, you know, trying to put together a hot rod. I will take very good care of it. It'll be something that I will treasure and value, and my dad and I will do the car right. And I offered to purchase or have him somehow, some way, if he still had the pink slip, to sign it over to me and pay him some money for the pink slip, just so that I'd have some type of paperwork. Well, he told me, he said, he was actually pretty nice about it, but it was a long pause, and he said, well, he says, I can't help you there because you'd have to go to the bank to get that. They have everything. And I said, well, thank you so much for your time. I know this is tough. I'm sorry you're having to go through this. And, you know, I hope you have a better future ahead for you. And at that point, I was screwed. I mean, the car was done. And, you know, that was that. So at this point, prior to taking it over to my buddy Mike's house, I was able to get some photos of it. Now, this was back in, this had to have been 1983, 84. And, you know, we weren't running around with cell phones taking pictures and stuff like that. So these were Polaroid photos, you know, the old tear out the photo, separate the photo from the paper. So these are the photos and the actual photos of the Chevelle as it was found. And the last two photos are photos of where we washed the car, cleaned it up, got it running. We actually drove the car. We actually set it with the jack stand or the floor jack. We got it out in the street and we backed it up and then drove it forward, and everything worked fine. The clutch, everything worked fine. So that's it for the photos on the car. Just to get into the car itself, one of the first things I did is I did look for the build sheet. And you know, I looked under the back seat. I looked in all the usual locations of where they would have been in 1970 in the Chevelle, and could not find the build sheet on the car. However, the car was a bright green metallic with the SS stripes. It did have a cowl induction hood scoop. It was an SS396 with the 350 horse engine. I'm not sure what engine code that was for the 350 horse, but it did not have the factory cast iron intake manifold or the original carb. It looked like somebody had put on an aftermarket aluminum Edelbrock with an aftermarket Holley carburetor. The car, it appeared to have, and I'm going off of memory on a lot of this stuff, it had a factory 4-speed, so I'm guessing it would have been either an M20 or an M22, I'm not sure. Don't know if it was a wide ratio or a close ratio. I did not get to fully drive the car. I drove it in first gear and in reverse. It did have a bench seat, had the original interior. The car was all original other than the intake manifold and the carburetor. It had the factory SS wheels. It had obviously the factory 4-speed, and believe it or not, it had a factory tack, which I'm told that's a pretty rare option. Everything was all in place. The interior was almost flawless. It didn't have any tears or rips. It still had the original seat belts hanging from the headliner that were in place. Car ran well. It did need a carb rebuild. It needed to have a key because obviously it didn't come with keys, so we needed a key for the doors and for the ignition. It had the factory, or it had somebody had primer spots on it. Again, you know, great car, a bucket list car, certainly a bucket list car on my list. What ended up happening to the car is obviously the tow company, a competitor tow company from my buddy who was supposedly doing all the paperwork for me, because I never followed up. You know, flaky 17-year-old, I should have done better, but coulda, shoulda, woulda. Apparently it went to their towing company a couple of cities away, and what I had heard is the owners of that towing company, when they figured out what had happened, they immediately did the same process that I had started with the car, where they did a private impound at their towing yard. They started a lien sale. A month later, after that was completed, it went to their son. The son took it to Arizona, and within 3 months the car was stolen. So I don't remember VIN numbers. I don't have any paperwork for any of that stuff. I've since lost contact with the buddy that owned the towing company, and he wouldn't have had that stuff anyway. He went through thousands of cars through the years that he ran his business. So I think what I'm going to probably try to do someday is, you know, maybe I'll try to find one again and do it the way that I should have done this car. You know, it's just the stupidity of youth, you know, just too young, you know, having no room here at the garage. My dad, you know, he never looked at the car, because I think if he'd probably seen the car, he probably would have tried to help me out a little bit. I don't know that 70s muscle cars were really, you know, his real big thing, but he did go with me to buy my 55 Bel Air two-door sedan, and he was with me when we bought the Gasser, which was in '91. And, you know, again, same story here. I want to buy a second car, and that one was just too good to pass up. So my dad said, yeah, let's get it. And of course, I wasn't living at home, so I didn't have to drag the thing home. So that's it. It's is what it is. You know, it's one of those stories where you know, you could either laugh about it, you could laugh at me for what happened, you could cry about it. You know, coulda, shoulda, woulda. It's over and done with. Nothing I can do about it. You know, live and learn, and you know, hopefully I'll run across an opportunity to buy another 70 Chevelle down the road. I might even clone one, because the price of these things have just absolutely gone through the roof. But it would definitely be a 4-speed big block car, because as far as 70 Chevelles go, that's the only way that those things ought to be done. Those things are just, they're badass. So thanks for listening. Thanks for putting up with a long-winded story. And, you know, I'm glad I still have my 55 Chevy. You know, that's the car that really meant something. My dad and I built it together. It's the longest one I've owned. This one is the one that's been in the family the longest, since 1963. Got to kind of help my dad put it together and build it after he retired from the fire department also. And, you know, this is what started me out on the car path. So just unfortunately I wasn't able to lock down adding a 70 Chevelle to that stable of cars that I have today. So thanks for watching, guys. I appreciate it. More Tri-5 stuff coming up. And yeah, please, if this or any of my cars, any of the stuff that I do on the channel, if it interests you, please subscribe to the channel. It really helps me out. And you know, leave a comment. I'm sure I'm probably going to get flamed for this one, you know, because of what happened with the Chevelle. But you know, what do? You're 17 years old, and you know, I'm sure everybody has a lot of regrets in their life, and that was certainly one of mine. I could have done it a lot better, because had I been able to secure that car back then, I guarantee you I would have owned that car today. So thanks, guys. Appreciate you watching. Take care and have a great week.
No! 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 No!